If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well as follow me and subscribe to me on all my other social media platforms. What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with another album review for you guys. Today, I am talking about the other big release that came out on March 3rd, and that is the latest studio offering from British prog metalers Haken with Fauna. So this is their 7th album, and I'll be honest, my experience with Haken has been kind of limited. I did check out their 2016 album, Affinity. I actually thought that was an amazing album. I believe that was in my top 15, top 10 list for 2016, if I recall. Way back in the day, whenever I was first really getting into reviewing music. But after that, I've not really followed up on anything they've done since. But when I heard a new album was coming out, I thought, you know what? Why don't I give this a shot? And after all, Haken, relatively newcomers to the prog metal scene in general, and they have a very interesting sound. You know, they kind of come from the influence of Dream Theater when it comes to the musicianship, but do have some cool riffs and great melodies where you have some cool vocal rounds with the vocals. And occasionally a little bit of that Meshuggah-inspired, djenty sound, but yeah, definitely Affinity was when they started really dipping their toe into doing more of the djenty stuff, but they did it very well on that album, and this is coming from a guy who is not into the whole djent thing, because it gets overused by so many bands, and they all just sound the same to me. But with Haken, they do that very sparingly. However, on this album, I feel like they do kind of go down the djent well a little too often, but there are some legit great songs on here. Tracks like Taurus, Nightingale, and The Alphabet of Me, like the first 3 tracks really got this album going super strong. Like Taurus being only under 5 minutes, but it's such a fun, uplifting, catchy tune. And then Nightingale, which I think was one of my favorites on the album, because the vocal performance on this track, well, then again, the vocal performance on the entire album was very, very good. Like Ross Jennings, showcasing why I would say when it comes down to great, clean prog metal vocals, he's probably one of the best newcomers to do that style, as his vocals on this album in particular almost feel like a hybrid of James LaBrie and Steven Wilson, a little bit. Like, it has influences of those two in that vocal style. But yeah, like Nightingale, you do get some like really cool grooves on this track in particular. And then following up with The Alphabet of Me, this is definitely where the songs where the album kind of takes a bit of a turn and then gets into some more dramatic, suspenseful moments. Like, there were parts on The Alphabet of Me, and really on most of the rest of the album going forward, you do get like almost like a roller coaster of like suspense, uplifting moments. It just goes all sorts of different moods, but mostly positive emotion, but also that like dramatic, suspenseful thing. Like, ooh, there's this like one section in The Alphabet of Me where it just suddenly turns very dramatic, and it's like, ooh, what's happening next? But then it goes back to being more on that like positive vibe for the most part. Then we get to Sempiternal Beings, one of the longer tracks of the album, and this is honestly where I think the album starts to be a little bit inconsistent for me. Like, it was a good song, but nothing about it really stood out for me. Beneath the White Rainbow, the following track, definitely picks things back up, at least in my opinion. Like, there are so many great vocal rounds going on there, and whenever you do get riffs, they do come out very, very well. Love Bite, the shortest track of the album, kind of an odd track, at least in my opinion. It almost feels like they could have expanded on that song just a little bit more, and I think it would have been a much better track if they had made it a bit longer and a little less strange. It probably would have been one of the better tracks. But then Elephants Never Forget, the longest track of the album at over 11 minutes, it's got a fun, catchy chorus. Like, I would say out of all the choruses on this album, this one definitely stood out the most in terms of catchiness and memorability. And also, awesome riff work. Whether it is that djenty style or traditional prog metal riffs, very much in that vein of Dream Theater, but also having a little bit of that classic prog, like Rush and Gentle Giant, kind of thrown into the mix. So yeah, Elephants Never Forget definitely, I think, does a much better job at building moods, but still maintaining great songwriting. And then Eyes of Ebony, the final track, again, very much in the similar vein of Elephants Never Forget, where it just takes you on this roller coaster of emotions and songwriting chops, and the second longest track of the album at over 8.5 minutes, and I thought it was a pretty solid closer for this whole album. But yeah, it's like I said, the first 3 tracks definitely got this album going in a strong way, and then after that, the album has a lot of peaks and valleys for me. But the biggest, well, before I get to that, let's take a look at some more positives. The fucking drums on this album are absolutely spectacular, like some cool polyrhythms, great straightforward beats, lots of odd time stuff. After all, it's prog metal, you're expected to get some occasional odd time stuff. The bass work, whenever the bass does show up and have its own standalone moment, it's pretty solid, but the bass, I felt in the production, didn't quite jump out. The vocals, like I said, the vocals are really, I think, the best part of this album, because this album is very vocally driven for the most part, because Ross is definitely showcasing his vocal abilities all throughout this album. Now, to the biggest complaint I have about this album, and it's the reason why this album's going to fall in the score, and it's because there's a lacking of memorable riffs on this album. You do get some riffs, but this album is mostly carried by the vocals and the drums. When it comes down to riffs, there aren't that many on here. It's more about the atmosphere and, like I said, the vocals and the rhythms rather than riffs. And honestly, that made this album kind of odd to listen to, because while I do enjoy the atmosphere and the vocals and the drums, I wish there was more riffage going on here, because that's one of the things I love about prog metal, is that while it can take you on many different rides of adventure, I gotta have riffs, and there wasn't that many riffs on here. Like, the riffs kind of take a back seat to most everything else about this album, and for that reason, I'm giving this album a 7.5 out of 10. It is a good album. If you're into, like, great vocals, some cool polyrhythms, you're gonna dig it. But if you're someone like me who wants to hear riffs, this might not be it for you. I'm kind of, like, in between. Like, I think it's a good album on its own merit, but the lack of riffs definitely hurt this album, at least in my opinion. But it's still a good album. I'm not saying it's bad. I just wish the guitars could have had more riff work going for it. But of course, that's just my opinion. What did you guys think of Fauna by Haken? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, you keep your horns high and your dreams wet.